Welcome to r/confessions, where people share their most disturbing secrets. I cut my family off 40 years ago. I can't bring myself to tell these things to the people in my life now. I left home at 18 and cut all contact with my family. I just walked away. I'm nearly 60 now, and I have never told anyone outside of my family any of this story in all these years. My parents both came from big working class families, each had 12 siblings. In each branch of the tree, one or two of the brothers did well in life and were outstanding family men. The other siblings did well enough and got by, but little more. In the family of Uncle B, my father's eldest brother, both cousins, boy and girl, eventually went to university, a first in the family. In the family of Uncle E, his 3 kids did well, one went to uni, the others into trades. So, 2 families made it out of the gutter. My father and mother were youngest in their respective families, but this resulted in different treatment. My father's siblings, excluding Uncle B, treated him as a little princeling his whole life. My mother's family treated her as a drudge while she was in her parents' home and as a disreputable creature after she married. Growing up, we had little to do with my mother's family, who believed themselves to be very much our betters. My parents married at 20 at the beginning of the 60s. I was their first child in 1961. 2 sisters followed, each 2 years apart. My father was an unskilled laborer his whole life. For the first 7 years of my life we lived in 2 rooms with an outside toilet and no bathroom. I couldn't really exaggerate the poverty we lived in. Meals were frequently just bread and butter and sometimes nothing. There was often no heating because we couldn't afford coal. We slept in 2 beds with our clothes piled on top of us. I got beaten for drinking milk without permission. I knew that we had less than other people. It was London in the booming 60s, and although there was poverty, there was also a degree of new affluence for working people. My friends, the few at school, had lives I didn't really understand. Frequent new clothes, bedrooms of their own, food that seemed even better than school meals, meat every day. They went on holidays. But most of all, it was clear that their parents were genuinely affectionate. It was a complete mystery to me. Why were we so different? I dreaded school holidays because I so often went hungry. My closest family were my father's brother's family, Uncle T, who lived in similar circumstances a few doors away. Even though they were not any better off financially, they had a different lifestyle because Uncle T and Aunt P could actually manage the little income they had. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl. The boy, cousin G, was very much an older brother to me growing up. The one person who was consistently generous and kind to me. I adored him. My father was a violent alcoholic. We were kept in poverty largely by his drinking. My mother borrowed money from loan sharks frequently, and I remember all the times we hid in the house to avoid the Taliban when she couldn't pay. I have vivid, horrifying memories of my father brutally beating my mother, using her as a punching bag. I recall the times when I was 4 or 5, when I tried to get in the way to stop him and got slapped about, and of my father threatening to kill me. Then afterwards, my mother would scold me for making her beatings worse. The violence was probably weekly, and from about 6 years old on, I was getting it too. He never raised his hand to my sisters for any reason. It irritated him that I did well at school. Uncle B's son was really academically successful, and I was determined that I would be like him. These were the days of grammar schools, and I really wanted to be placed in one. Well, my father and his family, Uncle B aside, would have none of it. At the age of 9 they were already telling me that I was getting above myself, and that I didn't have it in me to do well in school. Uncles B and E have my eternal gratitude for speaking up for me. It's easy to say now that I don't approve of the old grammar school elitism, but it provided me with an escape eventually. In 1970, we moved into a newly built council flat as part of a slum clearance program. 2 bedrooms, a separate kitchen, a bathroom, unbelievable luxury. It was also about this time that I began to understand my mother's role in our lives. She had a thyroid condition, I later discovered, but she told us all that it was cancer. Years later a family member told me this. For the first time this got her some sympathy from my father's family. I was terrified for years that she would die. All my life, until I left home, my father's family facilitated his alcohol abuse and covered up and excused his violence towards me. They did display some sympathy towards my mother, but never to me. Again, Uncle B aside, my mother gained respect for tolerating his behavior. In their eyes this made her an exemplary wife. I slowly and painfully realized that she was actually complicit in his abuse. His brothers and sisters would deny that any violence against me was taking place or that it was just discipline. The man used to punch me repeatedly in the face, kick me, throw me about. He threw bricks at me once. I must suppose I'm lucky that he never broke anything, and the people around me conspired to cover it up. My refuges were cousin G in school. My cousin G would get me out of the house whenever he could. He would take me out to the big London parks for the day or to museums. True, he would also take me out shoplifting with his mates, but he didn't involve me in anything more serious. I had a serious painful crush on him. I accepted, but didn't really understand, that he would occasionally cuddle me. He was 3 years older. There was never anything inappropriate in his behavior and I lived for the affection. School was difficult because of poverty. I could never afford any extras at school, no trips at all for example. And boys can be cruel. I could never talk about family holidays or birthday parties. My school uniform was all secondhand and looked it. Thankfully I worked out quickly that my family's hygiene standards were below the norm and sorted my cleanliness out. I enjoyed schoolwork and school sports. I couldn't play on any teams because it was an expense to travel to games. I had to make excuses to teachers for all of this. My mother insisted that I lie about it all. No one must know that we were penniless. I know that some of them must have known the real reasons, but there was nothing to be done. My father hated my educational efforts so much that he forbade me to do homework. I got used to doing homework by staying a bit later at school, going in early, sneaking to the public library, which was also forbidden. I worked as hard as I could at everything. I knew that they would try to force me to leave school at 16, but I wasn't going down without a fight. I scraped every penny I could find to buy books. I stole books from foils, to my eternal shame. One teacher gave private Greek classes as an extra, which of course I couldn't take. I stole the text he used and spent some of my library time teaching myself. I made a few friends at grammar school, good friends some of them. I also rather naively started telling people at school I was gay from age 11. Not the best idea at the time, but not disastrous. The school had faults, but toleration of bullying wasn't one of them. All in all, there was some teasing, but it worked out for me in the end and I don't regret it. By the age of 16 I was essentially out and proud to all but my family. Back to 10-year-old me. Our council flat had 2 bedrooms. One we kids shared, and one for my parents. And it was this that slowly clued me in, somewhat vaguely, to what was going on. My father came home every day drunk. I began to pay attention to his arguments with my mother. He would demand, loudly, to have sex with her. He would complain that he wasn't getting any. My mother would make her illness an excuse. And then, he would demand that one of my sisters join him in bed for a cuddle. A cuddle. I didn't know that there was anything remotely unusual about it. One of my sisters in underwear getting into bed with my father, also in underwear almost every afternoon. I didn't question why he never wanted to cuddle me. If anything, I was grateful. But it gradually became obvious to me that this cuddling explained why he treated his daughters differently. He was getting sex from them, not from my mother. And my mother was supplying him with alcohol and sending her daughters to his bed while playing the martyr wife. I didn't understand all this for a few years. Not the detail, not the psychology of it, but as time went on, it became clearer. I had no idea what to do. I was terrified of this man. I have to confess as well that I didn't like my sisters. They were frankly cruel to me and enjoyed their privilege. I struggled to understand why he treated my sisters differently. When I worked out why I was horrified and terrified, I was an early identifier. I worked out that I was queer before secondary school. I didn't tell anyone right then. It was out of the question at that age, at that time. But I was a fairly bright kid, and at the end of the 60s, start of the 70s there were whispers of a new attitude, and even at 10 years, I heard rumors of something called gay lib. This had an enormous effect on me. I decided that I would somehow get liberated. While we were still dirt poor, our housing situation improved again, because council policy was that brother and sister could not share a room after one reached the age of 11. We were moved into a larger flat in a somewhat nicer area. I met the first boy I fell in puppy love with, a year younger than me and a bit of a lad, a scrapper and functionally illiterate, but he really did have a heart of gold. Now in secondary school, I had already cautiously told one or two friends that I was gay, and of course, that sort of gossip leaks. Soon enough one of my sisters heard about it. She didn't tell anyone, except my crush. To my astonishment, he wasn't at all fazed. He was definitely forward in the puberty stakes and willing to play around on the down low. So, by 11 I was having sex of a sort. After a short while, my cousin G noticed that something had changed in me. He took me out one day and just straight out asked about it, and I told him. He was almost tearful when we talked about it. He didn't say a lot, but he warned me that I must never let my father find out. Never. I knew that, but I was curious as to why he was so insistent and so upset. And he told me why. He told me that my father was a notorious queer basher. A proactive queer basher who was known by his family and the local community to hang around in public toilets and violently assault men he thought were homosexual. Cousin G explained that he got away with because he just had to tell the police that the men exposed themselves or propositioned him. Apparently, everyone thought the men got the bashing they deserved. I learned that this wasn't a case of a punch to the nose, but of vicious bloody beatings. And it was confirmed when I later heard him boast of it to some of his drinking partners. He was proud of it. I will add one odd thing. My father never expressed any kind of racism or tolerated racism in other people. This puzzled me and outright confused me. To make things even more odd, once when he had a gang of friends in the flat, all close to fall down drunk, I listened while he rapturized at some length about the size of black men's penises. He was clearly fascinated by, excuse the crude language, big black cocks. He even mentioned that he had seen some at urinals. It was one of the most bizarre things I ever witnessed. I have never even tried to understand what that was about. Sometime after my 15th birthday, I stopped the beatings. I had reached the lowest point of my life. I couldn't carry on. The drinking, the material poverty, the disdain for me, and my efforts to get an education. All that I couldn't do anything about. But I couldn't stand the continual horrific violence. I decided that I would stop it, even if it cost my life. One day, I came home, and he was blind drunk as usual. My sisters weren't at home. He was demanding alcohol and sex from my mother. I came out of my bedroom, and he was standing at the top of the stairs screaming abuse at the world. He saw me, and threatened to beat me, unless I found him more booze somehow. Well, it all snapped inside me. I was right in front of him. The stairs were behind him. I pushed him. I was genuinely praying silently that I had killed him. After a few moments of my mother crying and wailing about what I had done to my own father, he moved, and it was obvious that with the luck of the drunk he hadn't been really hurt. He struggled to stand. I was terrified, and I could think of only one thing to do, discarding quickly the idea of finding a carving knife to finish the job. I stood over him as he threatened me and struggled to get up. I told him, looking him right in the eye, that he should take care, because the next time I had the chance, I would kill him. The next time I was behind him, I would kick him down the stairs. I might even decide to. Somehow, I scared him. He could see that it could happen. I also realized that he couldn't face the idea that people would find out that he had come close to being bested by his son. My mother told some family members who told me that I was wicked and ungrateful and probably unhinged. To be honest, that almost worked in my favor. They were a little scared of me now. My sisters were told as well, and they were terrified. They couldn't believe that I would hurt the man they loved so much. This episode changed things. The beatings stopped. After a few weeks of relative peace, I decided that I needed to reach out to my sisters. I had to ask them about the cuddling. I wasn't entirely clear in my own head, or at least I told myself I wasn't. I felt then that I should ask them and see if I could help them. And, I won't lie, I believed that, if it was incestuous abuse, that he would finally be out of our lives forever. They pretended shock. They denied that there was anything truly sexual going on. They berated my mother for denying my father the affection he deserved. But they also managed to insinuate that incest was happening and that I was jealous because it wasn't happening to me, that my father was favoring them with his physical love that I would never have. The older of the two then made her move. If any public accusation was made about the cuddling, she would tell our father that I was a queer. In that moment, I realized that he was sexually abusing them and that to cover it up, my sister would gladly put my life in danger because this man could be capable of killing me. So, it wasn't spoken about again, not for many years. I managed to carry on doing okay at school. I stayed until 18. I knew I couldn't do well enough for what I really wanted, a place at a prestigious university, with no support at home and a polite but condescending attitude from most teachers. I had to set my sights a bit lower. And then, the final bomb. It was my final year, my final term at school. I was about to sit a fortnight of hellishly difficult exams. I had even got the extra money required from Uncle B to sit A-level ancient Greek. Everything depended on the exams. The results of this set of three-hour papers in each subject were the only route to university. My mother decided that her cancer had returned. I'm astounded looking back that she got away with it. She marvelously faked a new bout of potentially terminal cancer. The day before my first exam, she got herself admitted to hospital, apparently at death's door. I don't know what she was actually telling the doctors. I was never allowed to visit. But the whole family was subsumed in a tsunami of pious grief. She came home after a day or two. Apparently no medical treatment could help. She was dying. I was told in no uncertain terms that I was staying at home with her on death watch and there would be no exams. Uncle B, who believed that it was true she was dying, was the only person who sympathized with me. But even he told me to skip the exams and take them at the next sitting. At school, one or two teachers even suggested it was for the best as I would likely find university too difficult. I knew that wasn't going to happen. I was desolate, but I really thought she was dying, and I had to be there with her in her suffering. Aside from anything else, I knew that, even if I sat the exams, I would need my parents' cooperation in getting my means-tested grant for further education, and they could just refuse it. In those days, there were no student loans. So, I sat with her at home, waiting on her hand and foot. I listened while she begged forgiveness for how I had been treated. She didn't want, she said, to die with that on her conscience unforgiven. She was of course the real victim, and it was my unfortunate, flawed character that had driven my father to drunken violence. For 2 weeks I prepared for her death. I consoled myself that the minute she was gone, I would leave. And, as you have already surmised, the moment the fortnight was over, she recovered miraculously. The family were delighted and relieved. Money was paid for a massive Thanksgiving. My father had to drown his joy in drink. But, it all came crashing down, at least as far as I was concerned. A cousin on my father's side spoke to me in private. I don't know why she chose to, but she did. I suspect she had some grievance of her own. She told me without elaboration that my mother had never had cancer. She had been ill years before with a thyroid condition and had her thyroid removed. She had played cancer survivor from then on and resurrected the big C now specifically to try to sabotage my education. And it worked. I couldn't believe it at first, and I couldn't see a way to confirm it or disprove the accusation. Just call her out, my cousin said. You will know if you confront her directly and tell her that you are going to go to the hospital and confront the doctors and nurses if she denies the truth. So, I did. I knew, in my heart, that I was hearing the truth. I first confronted my father and he caved. He said that my mother was a weak, narcissistic, attention-seeking woman, but that she really did need help. I don't disagree. I confronted her, and of course she caved. When I mentioned speaking to her doctors, it didn't occur to her or me that the doctors would refuse to discuss her health with me. She made a string of flimsy, incoherent excuses and of course she blamed me. My ludicrous and pompous plans to go to university instead of going out and getting a job to support her were the real cause of her behavior. I didn't waste any time. I packed my bags that same hour. I had no money and only one place to go. My cousin G was out in the world living independently and alone. He took me in without question. For 3 years we lived together in his tiny flat. We shared a bed at first. I ended up confessing my crush and he confessed that he had had what he called sick thoughts about me back in the day. But he had a decent moral compass. It had never occurred to him to molest me. I told him what I believed about my sisters and my father's abuse of them. And he told me that incest and pedophilia run through our family like water through a pipe. In every generation he knew anything about the rumors were there, although only occasionally substantiated by accusation and confession. And it wasn't just heterosexual activity. G had been molested by our grandfather and older cousins. I seem to have been passed over. I won't ever know why. I'll try to bring some sort of end to this. I got a job to earn my keep. I enrolled in night classes to keep up academically. I found out that at 21 I would be considered independent of my family for university funds. So, I made a 3-year plan. It succeeded. I cut off the whole family apart from G. Sadly, I had to cut out Uncle B because he tried insistently to force some kind of reconciliation and I would have none of it. I cut off my sisters. G agreed to keep my whereabouts secret. Those years living in a tiny flat in Earl's Court were the best of my life up to that point. G and I managed our money well enough that I had experiences I had only dreamed of. We ate in French bistros and Italian trattorias. He took me to the theater, even the opera. We went out to a local gay pub. He took me camping. As it came close to my starting university, G took me to get a copy of my birth certificate and helped me get a passport. I had loved French at school. Worked really hard at it. I listened to French radio, watched French films when I could, read French books, and G, God bless him, scraped the money for ferry tickets to Le Havre and a week on a campsite in Normandy. People might wonder why I mention this, but to me this is about the start of my survival and my new life. After 15 years away from my family, a cousin tracked down an old Yahoo Mail account I'd made years before. She wrote and asked me if I was me. I said yes. I was curious as to where it would all go. And to be honest, to live without a family isn't easy. Over the years I told no one what my life had been, and many people were curious about my lack of family and history. My cousin asked me if I would meet the older of my sisters. She wanted to be reconciled with me. I thought for a day or so then agreed. The meeting lasted maybe 20 minutes. My mother was there. My mother and sister asked me why I had run away. I laughed out loud. I told them everything that they knew already, and they denied it all. My father never beat anyone. He drank in moderation. My mother was a heroic cancer survivor. My childhood was idyllic. I ran away because I wanted to live a gay lifestyle. I walked out again. Since then I wrote to them. I wrote that I would only consent to talk to them if they all three admitted all the abuse I suffered, if they admitted that my father was an incestuous pedophile, and that my mother admit to faking her illness to manipulate me. I have never had a response from them. The saddest thing is that my cousin did send me more emails in a good faith attempt to keep in touch. In one email a few years later, she revealed that there have been several instances of pedophile incest since. The abuse carries on. I'm well out of it. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, because it really motivates me to make more of these videos. Have an amazing day.